Hello and welcome to Economic Divide with me, Kavita Wai, where on this week's show we'll be taking a look at the economy of India, paying particular attention to a series of protests and strikes that have hit the agriculture sector, following 3 controversial new farming laws passed by the Indian government. So, what are these 3 laws? Well, first up is the Farmers Produce Trade and Commerce Act, designed to allow electronic trading and e-commerce of goods. It also prevents state governments from levying any market fees. Now, next up is what's called the Farmers Agreement on Price Assurance and Farm Services Act. It's aimed to create a framework for contract farming through an agreement between farmer and buyer prior to the production of any goods. And the third and the final law is called the Essential Commodities Act, and this allows for the center to regulate certain food items in the course of extraordinary circumstances such as war, drought, or famine. Now, we'll obviously go into more detail throughout the show, but why don't you have your say on the topic? Are you a farmer in India? How have the new laws affected you? Write to us and let us know. We promise that we're going to share your stories on the next show. So let's head into more detail on this subject on our first report, looking into just what started the protests and just how seriously New Delhi is taking the farmers' concerns.
It's been labelled as the so-called world's largest democracy and has the world's second largest population, hosting an array of religions, languages and cultures. But one thing that's common across the country of India is its reliance on agriculture to sustain its huge population. So when the government of India decided to pass 3 new laws covering farmers and agricultural rules and regulations, the farmers took to the streets in their tens of thousands to protest the bills, voicing concerns over their rights and livelihoods. The Indian government, however, has argued that the 3 new laws will give farmers more freedom, but the vast majority of farmers, many of whom hold small freeholds, are concerned that the prices of their goods will be driven down and that the laws have no caveats in place to protect them should things go wrong.
70% of the rural households are engaged in agriculture in India. So that tells you that there is a huge population which is dependent on agriculture, whose livelihood is dependent on agriculture.
With many farmers coming from rural areas in India, agriculture is more than just a livelihood. It's a way of life that supports them and their families, depending heavily on the land that they produce on. So why then did the Indian government choose to change the current rules?
So what Modi has done is, from 2 points of view, it is interesting. One is it's more equitable in the sense that small farmers and large farmers can all sell to the private sector and have the private sector price, rather than the large farmers taking on the large-scale sales at the minimum security price. And that's one thing. And the second thing he has told them is to have what is called as contract farming. That is, some of the companies would give them fertilizers and various other things that they need, machinery, equipment, and give them a guaranteed price and buy from the farmers. And the third thing he has said is consolidation. That is, there are very small farms and they're not very productive, and the large farmers gain everything and they lose. So what he's trying to do is to consolidate.
There are also concerns about the lack of consultation by the government with the farmers, with one of the major concerns being that prior to the law being passed, farmers were assured prices via a scheme called the Minimum Support Pricing, or the MSP. This covered farmers should prices fall dramatically, ensuring that their livelihoods were not damaged. With the new law appearing to severely hamper the welfare of one of the poorest deciles of people in the country, it hence becomes clear as to why so many Indian farmers are converging on Delhi, coining the popular slogan, Dili Chayo, or Let's Go Delhi, where the farmers can put their concerns to the people in the heart of the government. As things stand, though, it seems that some of the pressure has paid off, as India's Supreme Court has temporarily suspended the law going into practice, and leaving the corridors of power in Delhi forced to go back to the drawing board with some new ideas.
Joining me in the studio now is Ataf Padidar. We're also joined by Suma Threya, a professor of technology strategy from the University of Essex. Her main field of interest lies in the economics of innovation and international economics, and she has published over 50 papers on these topics. Professor, many thanks for joining us here on Economic Divide.
Thank you for having me on the show.
Well, Professor, first up, Indian farmers, they're protesting about these new laws that's passed by the government. You have many rural people who rely on agriculture in India. Do you think this rule can be overturned due to the resistance that is being met?
I don't think they can be really overturned, but the protests are legitimate in the sense that it's going to cause a lot of distress in the farming population. The reason they can't be overturned is political and economic. The political reasons are, of course, that the Supreme Court has constituted a committee, the members of which have already expressed their support for the farm laws. The economic imperative is that there has to be a mechanism to transfer agricultural land to industrial uses. In every country that this happens, starting from the UK, it has been problematic. Thomas Hardy wrote about it. We have the works of Tolstoy. In Russia and China, these programs were achieved through large-scale collectivization missions. So in every case, it has not ever been easy to transfer this land, but in a way, the long-term growth of the economy depends on the less productive sector giving way to the more productive sector. And agriculture's role in the Indian economy is shrinking. This just shows you that there are other sectors more productive and contributing more to the economy.
Okay, Asif has some interesting points that are raised there by Professor Athreya there. Do you think that there are any advantages to these new laws that have been passed? For example, the ability for the farmers to sell directly to the buyers without a middleman, or do you think that these rural farmers in particular are just too isolated from the sale process in order to be able to take advantage of these so-called reforms?
Well, on paper, yes. The government wants to make the agricultural system much more modernized. It wants to give the farmers independence and eliminate the monopoly of mandis, the middleman between farmers and actual buyers. But mandis have been in this business since 1964. They are too powerful, especially in northern parts of India, like Punjab, where we saw the most intense protests. So I don't think that they can eliminate their role. And at the same time, what the government is offering is not like eliminating mandis. They're creating new middlemen. But what the farmers need is reforms, not new laws. So in reality, what they're offering is not practical, but on paper, it looks good.
All right, thanks so much for that. Interesting points also that you make. And also thanks to the professor, both of whom will be back with us shortly. Right now, it's a good time to take a look at how the impact of the COVID-19 virus has hit the world's second largest populous country and ascertain just how the vaccine rollout will be delivered to over 1.3 billion people in our next report.
We've already touched on the huge population of India, yet it seems that with a growing birth rate, the country's headcount is predicted to pass the population of China by the year 2026, making India the most populous nation on Earth. As the world's fifth largest economy, one could argue that having the largest population in the world is no big deal, as until now, India appears to have fared rather well. However, the arrival of the COVID-19 virus has taken its toll on India and brings with it one of the world's largest logistical challenges, namely distributing a vaccine to over 1.3 billion people, spread out in vast towns and cities, slums, and of course rural areas in India. With 10.5 million people in India infected with the virus and over 152,000 deaths, the loss of life is not the only issue affecting the nation. The impact on the economy has also taken its toll. But just how heavy has the impact been?
India has lost about $154 billion, according to some of the estimates that have been given, or 7% of GDP, which is quite high. And that's the economic impact. And most of the jobs have been lost, mostly in the services sector, not the IT and all that, but other services, mostly tourism, hotels, and that kind of stuff. And apart from that, most of these people who were employed in the service sector were from the rural areas. And now they're going back. 23 million to 40 million people are going back from the urban areas to rural areas because there are no jobs because of the COVID. All is shut up, and therefore the shops are shut and there's no business, and so they're going back.
But India has taken a bold leap in fighting the virus and has started what is essentially the world's largest vaccination program, hoping to vaccinate the first 300 million people by August, starting with frontline workers and the elderly. However, not all may be as rosy as the plan sounds, as reports taken from a survey of 8,000 Indians found that 69% of them are hesitant about taking a vaccination, which equated to over 2/3 of those asked, raising the question as to just how India will be able to persuade everyone to take part. With India still recovering from the 7.5% loss on their GDP between July and September of 2020 and dealing with a lockdown that cost around $26 billion, the financial impact on the country is one that may take some time to resolve, with the Indian government forced to cough up an initial bailout of 348 billion Indian rupees, which equates to around $4.75 billion, still a far cry from the amount of money being lost from the impact of the virus. What now remains to be seen is just how fast and how effectively India can deliver its vaccine rollout, and following this, just how long it takes for India to get back up and running again to pre-pandemic levels.
We're joined now back in the studio with Professor Suma Athreya from the University of Essex. Professor, India having the world's second largest population, obviously there's a challenge when it comes to, for example, the financial costs and the logistical distribution of the vaccine, the COVID-19 vaccine. How do you think the Indian government will afford and actually execute this huge task, which has started already?
Let me come to the execution first, which I think is a lesser problem because over the 1960s and 70s, because of the programs to eradicate smallpox and polio, India has actually a very good vaccine infrastructure, which is made up of primary healthcare centers, district level healthcare centers, a lot of civil society and religious organizations that have penetrated into areas which are not covered by the PHC or the DHCs. And the present government has also put this whole network together on the web. They've created this thing called Ayush, which basically links up all the different networks in the country that can push vaccines. So in terms of the ability to deliver and execute a vaccination program, I think this is a well-developed competence, and I think they'll do that quite easily. How will they pay for it? I don't know. The Indian economy has shrunk by 26%, which means the revenues are very, very small with the central government. And also in India, the health is a state subject.
Okay, I would think also just getting people the vaccine itself, or for them to come to the centers where the vaccine is applied. Well, as I said, the whole world is racing to get the vaccine out to their people, obviously, as soon as possible, challenge in itself. But with India having such a huge land surface, something I just talked about, as well as you have remote locations all over the place, in a sense, do you think that the sheer scale of the operation itself will see first the richer areas of India to have advantages over the poorer areas?
Definitely. India is one of the most unequal countries in the world, and we saw the true face of inequality during this pandemic when people in the poor areas, ethnic minorities and poverty-stricken neighborhoods were struggling with this pandemic, getting infected and dying from this virus. People in the privileged areas and rich families managed to stay away from danger. So I think after doctors, first responders and medical workers get vaccinated, it would be the rich people who would be lining up to get vaccinated, and God knows when people in the less privileged areas, cities and slums are going to get the chance to get vaccinated.
Well, many thanks for that, Athreya. Appreciate it. Okay, also thanks to the professor. Right now we're going to take a quick break here on Economic Divide. Don't go anywhere as the discussion will continue after these short messages. Welcome back to Economic Divide with me, Kavita Tapwai. Time now to take a deeper look at our main story in our in-depth section. India relies heavily on farming as a source of both income and sustenance. In fact, 70% of rural households depend primarily on agriculture for their livelihoods, with 82% of farmers operating small-scale farms. But the farming folk are still amongst some of the poorest people in India. Now, the wealth gap, in fact, in India is large, in particular when it comes to income inequality. The richest 10% of Indians own 80.7% of the wealth, with the trend heading in an upward direction on a yearly basis, with rural farmers feeling the pinch more than most. Now, one of the reasons for the growing gap, particularly for farmers, is the steady decline in agriculture in India. Over the last few years, the decline has been as much as 50%, which has meant that the contribution to the national GDP has fallen from 34% in 1984 to just 16% in the year 2020. Employment has also been affected by the decline in agriculture, with around 81% of Indians employed within the sector in the year 1983 to around 58% in the year 2018, and still falling, with India turning ever more towards the service sector. It seems that retraining and education will be a future priority for the rural civic authorities. In contrast to the decline in the agricultural sector, the facilities management market, well, it has grown 17% in the last 5 years, surpassing even U.S.'s $19 billion mark, supported in part by booming real estate, retail, and hospitality industry surge. Well, it's time now to take a look at our final package today, looking at how India is competing with China on a regional scale and why it pulled out of what's called the RCEP.
With such an important regional geographical position, trade in India is something that spanned the sands of time, and hence why so many nations were keen to have control over the country, hence justifying why the British, for one, called India the jewel in the crown when it came to their empire. Yet fast forward to modern day times, and India as a trading nation is placed in an even more interesting place, namely trying to compete with its northern neighbour China, a competition that's heated up to rumours of tension and conflict between the two. There's also tension on India's northwestern front with Pakistan, with both Islamabad and Delhi locked in a nuclear security dilemma, with both nations enjoying a nuclear deterrence that thankfully until now has remained just that, a deterrent. But when it comes to trade and partnerships, India chose recently not to enter a pact that would have seen it as part of the world's largest free trade deal, namely the RCEP. However, it only pulled out at the last second, raising the question as to just exactly why this was the case.
It's China that they're worried about. That is, China's exports will increase to India and the domestic industry will suffer. That is, the domestic firms will go down. And even though India brought down the tariff rates and quotas in 1991 with Manmohan Singh's liberation policies, it still prevails. The domestic industry is still protected in several of the areas. And they're quite worried if they enter into this agreement and there'll be free trade, and the Chinese will really export even more, and the domestic industry will suffer.
According to the International Trade Centre located in Geneva, India is a member of the Asia-Pacific Trade Agreement, the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, and the World Trade Organization, offering the country some incentives. It's also struck many deals and free trade agreements with a host of regional nations such as the Maldives, South Korea and Bangladesh. Yet India seems to prefer to avoid large pacts and continue to trade with its tried and trusted trading partners from the UK, the US and the EU. Hence probably the reason it chose not to join the RCEP, as many would claim that the deal only benefited China, which, as we know, is India's largest economic and regional geopolitical competitor.
Back again with us is Ataf Padidar and our special guest, Professor Suma Athreya. Professor, India has chosen not to join the RCEP, but regional economic pacts have proven to work in the past, like the EU or NAFTA. Do you think that India may one day actually join an international or regional economic bloc? And what are the advantages and disadvantages?
So the classic economic position on this is that the regional bloc is a form of collective protectionism. And it makes sense to join the regional bloc if your trade creation from joining the bloc is going to be greater than the trade diversion from existing structures of trade. And from this perspective, you have to ask, well, does India already have a lot of trade with the REC countries? And the answer is no. It doesn't have this trade. You could say, okay, it doesn't have this trade, but it might develop this trade over time. And again, here, it's not very clear that that can happen. So India's prominent trading partners are actually the Middle Eastern countries and the US and Europe. Those are very big trading partners. China has become important in recent years. About 10% of imports come from China. But it's not clear that China cannot be substituted by other countries, or that joining the REC will give India a very big advantage on Chinese imports. In any case, as you know, there are other geopolitical concerns, China and India having some border issues at the moment. And the last thing that the government wants is to seen as allowing China to enter and take it over economically.
Well, Atif, in our previous episode on economic divide, we did cover the RCEP, many people claiming that the deal actually just benefited China. Do you think that that is the main reason that India chose not to sign this deal, which happened at the last minute, from what we understand, and then preferred to actually continue trade deals with its more traditional partners instead, like the one our guest mentioned?
Well, there's no doubt that China is the main player in the RCEP deal, but it has guaranteed to help its partners, especially during this pandemic. It has the power, resources, and the experience to do so. What prevented India from getting involved in RCEP was not the fact that China was the main player. India didn't want to upset the United States. As we know, China and United States has been engaged in a trade war for the past couple of years, and Narendra Modi wanted to get closer to the United States since he took office. But what he didn't predict was the fact that maybe Donald Trump couldn't get re-elected, and we have to see how he's going to manage this crisis, because he lost the RCEP, China, and now he lost the support of Donald Trump.
Sure, indeed. That's going to be trying times for India, it appears, at this point anyways. Okay, many thanks to Atif Patidar and also Professor Suma Athreya for their valuable thoughts and for their contributions to this program. Time now to take a look at our popular news section, 1,000 Words. India, with its large and diverse population, is well on the way to becoming a contender as one of the world's largest economies, particularly as the service sector gathers pace across the country. However, it appears that as technology and the desire for innovation grows, the tendency to forget the more rural areas and poorer populations in the country is leaving many people discontent with the way things are going. With farmers protesting across the nation at the new laws being passed, it seems that India is on the tipping point as to where it's going to go next. Does it modernize and advance, or stick with tradition and risk losing out to global and regional competitors like China? I'm sure you will all agree there are some tough choices on the horizon for the Indian government. That's about all the time we have for this episode. I'd like to thank all my guests for joining me on the show. And don't forget, we want to hear from you. So do get in touch with us and share your stories. On behalf of myself, Kavita Ahwai, and the whole team here on Economic Divide, many thanks for watching. Stay safe, and we'll see you again next time.